Well, this is a big week, everybody. This is basically the week where you kind of find out what your team really is. This is what I always say, is that fantasy football should be looked at in terms of 4 quarters. The first quarter of the season, which is what we're in right now, where we're about to exit, is the quarter where you're kind of finding out who you can depend on and who you can't depend on, and what players you kind of have, and if you should be sending players away. The second quarter of the season is when you need to buckle down and get some more stability on your fantasy football roster. Third quarter, obviously, we're heading towards playoff time, so you need to make sure your lineups are relatively close to locked in, and maybe you have a couple debates, and then the fourth quarter, you've got to get that team for playoffs. So obviously, we are in the fourth quarter. We're in the first quarter still, and we've got to go through some stuff because there's lots of injuries. You know, I know a lot of people feel like there's a lot of injuries right now in particular, and I mean, it kind of feels normal to me. There's always a lot of injuries. It's a violent game. But obviously, there's injuries that we need to go through. So we're going to go through important injury notes that we need to walk through before Week 4 fantasy football. So while we're looking at the news right now, make sure to put your questions in. We'll start answering questions here soon. And make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel to show your support. And take advantage of the Patrick Mahomes line on underdog, which is at 0.5 total yards. Link is in the description to take advantage of it. Some important news. Joe Mixon is not expected to play today. That doesn't really come as a surprise. Obviously, we didn't expect Joe Mixon to be able to play in this game. So I'm not too surprised at this news right here. This is just kind of par for the course for Joe Mixon. Hopefully he comes back in Week 5. Christian McCaffrey may be eyeing a early November return. So obviously it doesn't matter for this week, but those of you who have Christian McCaffrey, I guess there's some hope. You guys know how I feel, though. Do not expect McCaffrey to play. Prepare for him to not play at all for your fantasy football team this year. I think that's the best way to look at it. Olave and Alvin Kamara. Apparently, they're both expected to be active, is what I've seen. Now, I don't know if there's, questions about the snap counts for both of them, anything like that. I would play Kamara still. I would play Olave in a lot of situations still. I did say on the tight end video, I do really like Taysom Hill this week. I really do. I feel like, the same thing with Taysom Hill is like every year he's going to hit like massive games like twice a year in fantasy. It's hard to tell when those games are going to be, but it's a lot of times worth taking the shot on when he has that kind of upside. And I'm predicting one this week. I'm putting it out there. I'm predicting a good Taysom Hill game because with a limited Olave potentially and a limited Alvin Kamara, I think that there's good stuff coming for him. Nick Chubb, his window is expected to open on Wednesday. So that's pretty good news for Nick Chubb owners if you have Nick Chubb, because Jerome Ford's not cutting it. Deebo Samuel expected to play today, so is Keenan Allen. So that's obviously big news. I think Deebo is must start as long as he plays. Deebo Samuel is must start. He's just simply too important to that offense. So that tells me that if he's going to play, they're going to use him. I have a hard time believing he's a decoy. So I would say play Deebo Samuel. Keenan, I think, can be played. Keenan Allen, I have him higher ranked than Rome Odunze now this week. Because the reality is with Caleb, what we saw in Week 1 is he likes to target Keenan in those short route situations here. Devontae Adams apparently could miss a couple games, so that's not very good. I think that's all the important stuff that we need to go through. I guess Raheem Mostert is questionable for tomorrow. I would just advise not playing him personally. Apparently, Rachaad White got added to the injury report with an illness yesterday. And if you haven't seen, A.J. Brown got ruled out. A.J. Brown will not play. And Justin Herbert and Jordan Love are both expected to play. So that's kind of our early news injury notes. So let's go ahead, start answering some questions for you guys. And first up, we had Dizzy B. What's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Flex Jennings, Cooper, Quentin Johnson, or Chuba Hubbard. Yeah, I have a lot of issues with Juwan Jennings all of a sudden, man. I got flack for putting him at number 12 earlier in the week in my wide receiver rankings. That was under the assumption that Debo was going to miss and maybe George Kittle too. Or it was under the assumption Kittle was going to miss. Kittle's obviously back, and now we're seeing that Debo's expected to return. There's just not as much. I don't want to say there's not as much upside because obviously the upside is still on his side because he's a good player and he's being used. But I just don't know what the usage is going to be. The usage is very, very variant at this point without, with all these stars back. So I shy away from Jennings at this point. Jennings to me is like nothing more than like a top 36 wide receiver. I would play Cooper over Jennings, and I would play Cooper over Quentin. Cooper versus Hubbard is the real question for me because with Amari, the matchup's good. And the thing with Amari is, I said this earlier in the week, look, the thing you have to understand about Amari Cooper is that he's not going to be consistently doing what he did last week. Like that was a good week, but it's kind of par for the course for Amari's entire career almost, especially with the Browns, is he's going to be, infrequently doing these massive games. Whereas Chuba, I think the matchup's really good for him today. I think he's looked really good. If you take out that week 1 game, Chuba has looked really good. Like he's been the consistent piece of that Carolina Panthers offense. So now they have Andy Dalton, who obviously looked night and day. I'm going to take the matchup, and I'm going to take the momentum with Chuba Hubbard personally. I would personally play Chuba Hubbard over Amari Cooper myself, Dizzy B. Appreciate the super chat. Next up, we had Trigga Trey. What's going on today? Start 2, B-Rob, Mason, and Jonathan Taylor, full PPR. Well, you've got good problems, Trigga Trey. You've got really good problems that you're dealing with here. I can't sit Jordan Mason in most situations here. The offensive upside is great, and the matchup's great. Like, they could be in a very run-heavy game script very early on. And we already know, like, the 49ers, they want to run the ball anyways. But especially in a matchup where I think that they could very easily crush the Patriots today, I don't really want to sit Jordan Mason myself. So I would go with Jordan Mason. It really comes down to Brian Robinson and Jonathan Taylor. And most of the time, I would say, like, Brian Robinson, I'd sit him over Jonathan Taylor. I love the matchup this week for Brian Robinson, and I don't like it at all for Jonathan Taylor. It's tough. I got to tell you, this is a tough one. Jordan Mason's definite, and then Brian Robinson, the upside that I see with his matchup is higher than the upside that I see with Jonathan Taylor's matchup. But Jonathan Taylor's obviously the focal point of the offense, and I think is just a better player than Brian Robinson. I just look at the way the Steelers have been shutting down running backs this year, and no running back has been able to get anything going. The best running back performance against the Steelers this year has been Bijan Robinson, and it wasn't even that great. So I think I'm going to play Brian Robinson along with Jordan Mason in a full PPR format. Appreciate the super chat. MNEIV, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Start Tucker, Jalen Naylor, or Tyreek? Yeah, this is a good question. I appreciate the Tyreek Hill questions because it is important that we go through the Tyreek Hill situation because, with Tyreek Hill, I think a lot of people are just, I don't want to say overreacting because it definitely is a problem with Tyreek Hill's situation here because obviously the upside without Tua is just not very high. But what we have to remember with Tyreek in particular is that Tyreek Hill, last week obviously, and in addition with week 3, they both were bad weeks for Tyreek Hill. I think that Skylar Thompson sucks. And I think that there's a reason, like, not only is Tyler Huntley playing today, I actually saw a report just a little bit ago that Skylar Thompson may be the emergency third quarterback today. So that means that he may be, like, technically inactive, but the emergency guy behind Tim Boyle, who hasn't played for the team all year. Like, that's how disgusted they were with Skylar Thompson. It's not that I think Tyler Huntley's a superstar or anything like that, but he's been just fine with the Ravens. And I just think that, listen, with Tyreek Hill, this is not a guy that you can just like convince yourself, oh, we really don't need to get him the ball. It's like that in order to win, to have a chance to win, you need to play Tyreek Hill. So they're going to find ways to do it, I think. I think this week's going to be different. The matchup is better. And I would just go with Tyreek Hill personally. Like, with Trey Tucker, that's just there's too many issues there. Bad quarterback play and just, not as consistent as Tyreek Hill. And then Jalen Naylor has the Jordan Addison problem, where Jordan Addison is back and we can't really predict a ton of success with a first-round rookie from last year who was really good and just hasn't really been able to do it this year. I prefer Tyreek Hill in this matchup. I would say that there's a line for me with Tyreek Hill, and maybe we'll find it as we answer questions today. Appreciate the super chat, though. Zerb, you were up next. Appreciate the super chat. PPR pick 1 flex. Stevenson, Kmet, Shaheed, or Olave? Full PPR. Kmet, I just don't really like throwing out a tight end at the flex position, especially with Keenan Allen back. I think that probably, I don't think it helps Cole Kmet, that's for sure. I think that with Keenan back, it ultimately probably limits Cole. With Keenan back, it probably ultimately limits Cole Kmet. And I just don't trust the upside being there as much without as many opportunities. So I'm out on Kmet. Shaheed is obviously a big play guy. Like, that's not exactly like a PPR play. Like, he can be played, but he's providing equal amount of upside basically in all formats. Because if anything, like, he's catching 2 or 3 balls and one of them is in the end zone, or 2 of them if you get lucky, right? So it's not like you're getting, tons of reception upside from Rashid Shaheed. It's really between Olave and Stevenson. And I got to tell you, like, I've seen the room is kind of split with Ramondre, to be honest with you. Like, for me personally, I was never in on Ramondre. I'm even more out on him right now. Like, Ramondre's situation in New England, it's starting to look exactly how I thought it would, which is that Ramondre Stevenson is on a really bad team. And he can't really overcome that. And especially when he's fumbling the ball, I would not be surprised, and I think nobody should be surprised if we start to see more Antonio Gibson out there. So I'm going to personally go with Olave in this matchup. I just think that with Olave, in the matchup against the Falcons, he's going to have, I think, more reception upside than any of those receivers. And with Stevenson, I think, honestly, unless you're getting like a big play from Stevenson, he's kind of going to be bad. I just don't expect them to have much success today versus the 49ers defense. Appreciate the super chat, though. Next up, we had Sebastian Cruz. What's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Flex 1, Higgins, Waddle, Keenan, or Shaheed? Shaheed's out. I like all those guys better than Rashid Shaheed. Maybe not Waddle, but definitely Keenan and T. So it really does come between Keenan and T. Waddle's just too affected by the Tua situation. Like, him along with Raheem Mostert, I think, are probably the 2 most affected. The reason being is because Waddle isn't the wide receiver 1, so it's going to be even more of a struggle to get him going than it is with Tyreek. And number 2 is that, with Raheem Mostert, he doesn't have the pass catching upside that Achane does. And if they can't get the passing game going, like, their offense is not going to be able to run the ball very well. They're one-dimensional. So, he's injured. He's injured too on top of it. So for me personally, it's between Keenan and T. And this week, with T. Higgins, there's a good amount of upside with T this week. There really is. Like, I said it all week. People were kind of lower on T after this week. And I said, listen, like, T. Higgins was not a ghost in that game. You know what I mean? Like, he was plenty involved in that game. And he had two targets right at the end zone. One of them was actually in the end zone. He just didn't get his second foot down. And the second one was right along the sidelines where he made a sweet one-handed catch that was just out of bounds. So he's going to get more opportunities. Whereas with Keenan, like if he gets like the targets that he's going to get, they're very rarely going to be down the field. So a lot of these are going to be like, if he gets like 6 catches, it'll be for like 40 yards or something like that, or 50 yards maybe, especially with an injury that he's been plagued with since last year. So I just think that I would personally prefer T. Higgins in this matchup against the Panthers. Appreciate the super chat. Brian03, what's going on? Fields or Love, 6-point passing touchdowns? Yeah, I got to tell you, Jordan Love definitely throws kind of a wrench in a lot of things for me. I was, because it's hard for me to come out and say, like, Jordan Love this week needs to be in your lineup no matter what. Because, this is a brutal matchup to come back to against the Vikings defense, divisional matchup. Like, it's a hard matchup to expect a lot from Jordan Love. With Fields, the matchup's really there. Like, I can definitely see the matchup here for Jordan Love, or I'm sorry, for Justin Fields, because the Colts stink, and Fields obviously has the rushing upside. I just can't get behind the lack of passing volume with Fields. And it's like last year where it's like, this dude needs to be, it's like every year, this dude needs to be running like close to 100 yards and maybe even 2 touchdowns for him to see a really good fantasy upside. Because he's just not like throwing many touchdowns. And I might be dumb. I'm personally going to play Love myself. I just can't. The 6-point passing touchdowns, like, I just see more likelihood that Love throws more touchdowns than Fields this week. Because he's just not, like, Fields is just not like a touchdown thrower. This offense just isn't really set up like that. They're a run the ball down your throat offense, and every couple weeks he'll throw a touchdown pass, maybe 2. So, I'm personally gonna play Love in this matchup. I know it's not the smartest thing, maybe, but in a 6-point passing touchdown, that kind of is the separating factor for me. Appreciate the super chat, Brian. Alex Steele is up next. Full PPR start 1. Flowers, Reed, Ayuk, or Amari Cooper. Full PPR, here's the thing. They're all pretty good options here, right? Like, Amari's probably, it's either Amari or Ayuk. That is my least favorite because, again, with Amari, it's so boom or bust with Amari, and his quarterback sucks. So it's hard to really rely on him. With Ayuk, he's just looked bad, right? And now Debo's back, so it's like, I just don't see as many opportunities for him. And so with Zay tonight, Zay is in a good spot, I think, because I honestly predict that Buffalo might get out to an early lead and Baltimore has to kind of trail, right? They're playing catch up and they have to throw the ball down the field more, and that's where Zay comes in. Now, with Jaden Reed, I've been saying all week, you have to be excited when Jordan Love comes back for Jaden. Because Jaden Reed, like, this is going to be like a period of shift right now. Now that Jordan Love's back, Jaden, for me personally, goes from good flex option to must start. That's where we're at with Jaden Reed. Because, again, Jaden Reed is very much like Debo. Debo gets a lot of touches in a lot of different ways. Jaden Reed is turning into that. So he always has that flexibility because of the carries that he's going to get. The guy's always in motion. And just with Jordan Love, he has the chemistry with. So I personally would say Jaden Reed is my guy this week. Like, I get it. The matchup stinks. And maybe I look like a fool at the end of the day. But Jaden Reed, to me, like, he just presents the most upside out of this group with Jordan Love back in action. Appreciate the super chat. Smooth Criminal Entertainment, you were up next. Appreciate the super chat. Need one in the flex. Akers, Jacoby, Christian Kirk, PPR. I'm not playing Kirk. I refuse to play Kirk. With Kirk, he's done next to nothing. I mean, if you take out that week 3 game where they were in need to throw to somebody, like, Christian Kirk's been irrelevant. The wide receiver you really want in that offense for fantasy, it's Brian Thomas Jr. Christian Kirk looks toasted to me. He looks like he's just done. So I'm just not playing Christian Kirk myself, and I'm not advising anybody to play him. With Cam Akers, obviously I said it earlier in the week. This is the matchup to try Cam Akers on, because with Cam Akers here, you kind of have to throw last week out in a little bit of the sense of the word, because he was playing the Vikings defense and they were in a hole like basically right away. So it's not like he had many opportunities to, play in a run first game script. He got a touchdown at the end of that game to save his week, but he didn't run the ball very efficiently, obviously. And this week, the matchup's so much better. Like, this is the game to try Cam Akers on. Now, I'm personally going with Jacoby Myers. The reason why is because the matchup is pretty juicy, man. Like, as bad as the quarterback play is in Las Vegas, the matchup is great. Like, Jaden Daniels, as good as he is, and I think he's going to be really good, the dude completed like 90% of his throws. I mean, that's like outrageous. And Jacoby Myers, he's kind of like, he's always better than people predict, including myself. And he's over the middle. He gets a lot of short routes. So I think that Jacoby Myers honestly has a lot of upside this week. And I'll leave it to you to say this. My gut says Jacoby Myers. The matchup is great. And Jacoby Myers is, typically more involved than a lot of people think he will be. And last week, I think he had like 17 points or something like that. He had a good week last week. And with Cam Akers, I just don't really believe in the player as much. I've always kind of been lower on Cam Akers than consensus. But now, obviously, he looks way worse than he did with 2 Achilles tears. And I get it, the matchup's great for Cam. I'll leave that one to you and say trust your gut. But my gut and my advice, I'm playing Jacoby Myers. Appreciate the super chat, though. Next up, we had Daniel Orton. What's going on? Good to see you in here today. Chris Olave or Jacoby Myers? I don't know about Chris. I don't blame you. Chris is definitely a scarier play this week. With Olave here, the funny thing is that all week I was like, I think Olave is going to be a pretty decent play. And because with Atlanta, they're in a situation where it's like Atlanta has not been particularly great stopping the pass. And I think that Olave, with Rashid Shaheed kind of going back to what he is, which is just mainly a deep play, a deep play threat who's not going to get many targets, I think Olave is going to be a good play. But obviously, he's going to play today, and it's all good to hear that. But at the same time, I look at this and I'm like, Jacoby Myers is he's running through an open field right now, right? Like Jacoby Myers, no Devontae Adams. It's him and Trey Tucker. And I think that Trey Tucker becomes the big play guy today. Whereas I think that Jacoby Myers is going to be the guy who gets like 10 targets. Like at the very least, I think it's very, very likely that he gets like 10 targets in this game at least. So in this matchup against the Bengals defense, like that defense has been wide open in the middle of the freaking field. So I'm like, the matchup is really enticing for me for Jacoby Myers. To be honest with you, like I am going to play Jacoby Myers over Chris Olave myself. Appreciate the super chat. G Medina, what's going on? You're up next. Happy NFL Sunday, back at you. We're in it, baby. We're in it. PPR for this week. Starts Kenneth Walker or Ford. Also, do I drop likely for Strange or Schultz? And Pickens or Addison to replace Devonta Smith? Thanks. Okay. First part of this, Kenneth Walker or Ford. There's no chance I'm playing Jerome Ford if Kenneth Walker's back, and he is, of course. My thing with Ford this week is I like him okay in certain matchups here. In certain versus situations, Kenneth's not one of them. And I get it. Like, the concern with Kenneth is real. Like, Kenneth may not be taking 100% of the snaps, basically, like he was in week 1. Actually, I'd be kind of shocked. All right, we got to get rid of this spammer right now. Give me 1 second. We got to get rid of the spammer. I really do think that with Kenneth Walker, I would be shocked, to be honest with you, if I saw him take that week one workload. But at the same time, like, I just think he has more upside than Jerome Ford does. You know, the matchup is just as good against against the Lions. From a pass catching perspective, I'm gonna go ahead and play Kenneth Walker. I just think he's the better player at all. In all things considered, I think he's the better player. And let me clarify that. The matchup's not great against the Lions. The Lions' run defense is really good. Second part of your question, do I drop Likely for Strange or Schultz? You know, I got to tell you, like, I am personally holding on to Likely in a lot of leagues I have him in because I personally do think he's the better option at this point than Mark Andrews. Like, with Andrews, what we need to address reality with Mark Andrews is that this guy has not, like, it's not only that he's not being targeted, the guy hasn't been on the field much. He's been, like, barely on the field. Last week, he was, like, on the field for, like, 35% of the snaps. That's awful. Isaiah Likely was on the field for, like, 65. So, you know, I think, to me personally, like, Likely looks like the better option in Baltimore at this point. Now, I will say that obviously his production isn't there, and I do prefer to play Strange over Likely this week. I would play Likely over Schultz, but the gap between Likely and Strange is not that wide for me. Like, I'd prefer to play him. I'm not dropping Likely for him because I think Likely has longer term upside. And I think that someone would pick him up if you were to drop him. So I'm going to go ahead and say I wouldn't do that personally because, like I said, Likely has the long-term upside. And he's just getting more involved. And I get it. Last week doesn't show for it, but the guy's on the field more than Mark Andrews is. So I'm not dropping Likely. If you have another option at tight end, like if you've got two tight ends and your other tight end's like Pat Freiermuth, I'm okay with dropping Freiermuth. I know that's an unpopular opinion. I just don't really see much upside for Pat Freiermuth myself personally. I think I see way more with Isaiah Likely. And then the next question was Pickens or Addison to replace Devonta. I'd go with Pickens here because I think that Pickens at least is the wide receiver one in the offense, right? Like with Jordan Addison, it's a guy I was really big on before the start of the season. I still really like the player, but we haven't seen him do anything. And the matchup against the Packers is not particularly ideal. So for me personally, you know, I just kind of want to see more with Jordan Addison first before I play him over a wide receiver one. Jordan Addison at this point, like, I'm happy to have him in best ball, but I'm glad I didn't draft him in any of my redraft leagues. Dude, that's kind of how I feel about Addison's situation is like, he's not as, I would not feel comfortable playing Jordan Addison in any of my leagues. Let's put it that way. So I would go with Pickens to replace him. And again, I appreciate the super chat today. G Medina, good to see you in here. Jerg Z, what's going on? You were up next. Appreciate the super chat. Full PPR, start a wide receiver. DJ Moore, Pickens, Reed, or London. And start a running back. Ramondre, Steele, or Bucky Irving. Full PPR, a wide receiver. Jaden Reed is my guy. Yeah, like I said, Jaden Reed's upside in this offense with Jordan Love is amazing. It's amazing. Him and Love have a lot of chemistry. Like, week one obviously was a massive week, and like, I'm not saying you can expect that on a week-to-week basis, but if you look back to last year, what were we seeing a lot of last year? The end of last fantasy season, Jaden Reed was crushing it. Him and Love were amazing together. That was clearly Love's preferred target. So even though Jaden Reed's not like a 10-target guy, right? Like, that's not really what he is. What Jaden Reed is even if he gets like 6 or 7 targets, that dude is so efficient on every touch he gets. So I just think that I think that he's got so much upside that people just kind of need to recognize. Now, I will say, like, he is not going to hit every week. He is Debo is the best guy I can compare him to. Debo Samuel is like the perfect comparison for Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed is he's so able to hit on big plays, and he's used like Debo, but obviously it may not be there that day for Jayden Reed. I'd still take the shot on the upside. DJ Moore, like, he's got just as low of a floor right now, and the upside really isn't there right now. We got another spammer this morning. Gotta love all these spammers, right? With Pickens, the upside just isn't as high. I think his floor is probably just as high, but it's not as high upside. And with London, the matchup against the Saints is, first of all, it's not a good one. So I just personally think that Jayden Reed is going to be, you're going to be hard pressed to try to convince me that Jayden Reed should go on your bench. I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm just saying in general. You know what I mean? So start a running back here, Ramondre Steele or Bucky. I wish I could confidently tell you Bucky. I wish it was Bucky Irving's week. It's just, I can't get there. I can't get there. Bucky's hurt. Let's see what the Bucky Irving update is. Is he even active today? Bucky Irving is expected to play today. So, yeah, I mean, that's good news for Bucky, obviously. Dude's dealing with a hammy, though, and it's like this was a great time for him to break out, but it's tough to put a lot of confidence in him, that's for sure. So Bucky is unfortunately not going to be the guy when I can play Carson Steele, who I believe is still the running back one this week for the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, obviously they activated Kareem Hunt off of the practice squad, and he's on the active roster. We don't even know if he's getting a helmet yet, first of all. He's like listed as the RB3 on the depth chart, and I just think there's a reason they put him on the practice squad to start. It's because he wasn't, like, I don't think he was in playing shape. This guy, like, he came the last 2 years, he's just done nothing but regress as a player. So I think that Steele, like, showed exactly what we saw last week, was that he's leading the team in carries, and I don't think that's going to change this week. Now, it may change next week, but I think that he plays this week the majority of the offensive running back snaps, and I prefer his upside over Ramondre. So I wish I could go with Bucky Irving. If you've got a gut feeling, I would say play him, because I want to. I just can't. My gut is telling me no. I'm gonna go with Carson Steele. Appreciate the soup chat. Dizzy B, you're up next. Good to see you again. Okay, wait. I can get Jacoby Myers. Flex Hubbard still? Ooh, yeah. Let's reconsider that one. So, Chuba Hubbard, I think the matchup's great. That's the good thing. With Chuba Hubbard, the matchup is really great, and Jacoby's matchup's just as great. Now, again, Chuba Hubbard has looked really good the last 2 weeks. Like, if you take out week one, Chuba Hubbard's been a really good player in this league. And I think the matchup's really great for him to do that again. Now, what I ultimately struggle with Chuba, and it's not just with Chuba, it goes for the entire Panthers offense. That offense, like, I get it. They looked great last week, and I have like a personal like attachment / PTSD with that matchup at this point, because the Raiders defense, obviously, and I just can't, like, the Panthers offense is not all of a sudden the best offense in the league. It's just not the reality we're looking at here. So I just don't really trust them as much, but I don't trust the Raiders either. You know, Jacoby Myers, I think, does get 10 targets in this game. They're really close to me, to be honest with you, Dizzy B. You know, I know you've been with the channel for a while. I think that you should trust your gut on this one, because they're really close to me. I think you go either way, because personally for me, I think I would probably end up playing Jacoby Myers in this game, because the matchup against the Browns, I think, is a pretty decent one. That secondary is kind of banged up, and he's, like I said, I think he's going to get 10 to 12 targets in this game. Hubbard, I think ultimately what separates Hubbard from me is I do think Carolina loses this game. So they're probably not going to be in a run-heavy game script come like the third or fourth quarter. So that probably is going to limit Hubbard's upside. So go with your gut. I'm leaning Jacoby Myers, though. I would say this. You're implying that Jacoby Myers is on the waivers. If he's on waivers and you're considering dropping Chuba for him, I wouldn't do that personally. I would keep Chuba Hubbard long term. I think if Chuba has another good week, there's going to be a real conversation within that Carolina Panthers building of, do we automatically just start Jonathan Brooks right now? Or do we just kind of like maybe give him a couple touches per game? Because Chuba might make it too hard for them this week. So that's just my advice, but I would play Jacoby Myers myself this week. Appreciate the super chat. King Him, you were up next. Appreciate the super chat. I have Henry, Mixon, Mason, Zach, and Corum. Nico, Rice, Drake, Olave, Zay, J-Mo. Should I trade Mixon and Olave for Kyron and Ridley? 12-team Dynasty, full PPR 2 flex. Well, Dynasty definitely changes the outcome of all of that. If you can send Mixon and Olave for Kyron and Ridley, I would personally do it, though. Because Mixon, at this point, guys, like, Mixon definitely does look good. I don't love him as much for a Dynasty league. Like, the guy's close to 30, and I think he's only on, like, what, a 1-year contract right now? I think he's got, like, 1 year left on his contract. The Texans have a couple guys like that. They've got Diggs. They've got Mixon. They're obviously trying to maximize the window with C.J. Stroud not having to pay him as much. I just think that ultimately Mixon is not somebody that I want to keep in Dynasty in the long run. Like, what we're at right now with Mixon is he's producing past the traditional ceiling of age for running backs. And you should take that as a blessing and try to capitalize on it. Because with Mixon, it's going to come. The downturn is going to come. It's just a matter of time. So I would personally just get out ahead of that and trade Mixon away. Another spammer here. These spammers today, guys. I would personally try to get out ahead of it in the Dynasty League and try to sell him while I can. Because Kyron Williams, like, he's younger, obviously, and he's, on an offense that's just as good as far as, like, the way they're run and the way their scheme is. So, yeah, I think that I would personally do this because Olave, Olave, I think at the end of the day is going to be a pretty disappointing Dynasty asset. I think he will be. Ridley's older, definitely by several years. I think Olave ultimately is going to be disappointing, to be honest with you. Maybe try to get somebody a little bit better than Ridley. I think that's probably a good way to look at it, but at the same time, I just think he's ultimately, I think he's just, Olave is just kind of meh. Like, his production at the end of the day has just been kind of meh. And I think it's going to continue to be. Appreciate the super chat. Patrick, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat today. Morning, 3-0 PPR. Well, congratulations on 3-0. Drop Ertz or Chase Brown for Leggett or Dobbs or just hold. Have Laporta but like to stash someone each week. I don't blame you for doing that. Tight ends are definitely, obviously, really tough. Chase Brown, I don't really want to drop Chase Brown personally because he is, like, as clearly as it is Zach Moss's job, it's also, like, Chase Brown has been involved to a certain extent. So I do think that, he's not irrelevant enough. And obviously, if Moss were to go down, Chase Brown takes over. So that's definitely a factor. Leggett is definitely someone who has a lot of upside. There's no question about it. He's got plenty of upside. And I think Dobbs is a good play for sure. But, the guy I would drop if you have Laporta, I personally would just stick with just Laporta myself. Like, I get what you're doing here. It makes, like, the move that you're making is understandable, but I just don't play like that personally. So, like, if it was me and my team, like, I would just drop Ertz and grab either Leggett or Dobbs. I'd probably prefer Dobbs, to be honest with you. But, I get what you're doing, and I get why you're doing it. If that's what you like to do, then I'm not going to tell you to change that necessarily. You're 3-0, it's working for you, right? Like, you don't need to change things drastically. So, I would just say if you're not willing to drop Ertz, I would just hang. Because Chase Brown, like, I get it. Right now it sucks. Like, he's not providing you much. But at the end of the day, if Moss goes down, you've got an immediate start at running back here. So you just kind of have to look at it that way. Appreciate the super chat, though. Next up, we had Carlos Perez. What is going on today? 10-team PPR, another Dynasty question. Trade away Mason and a second. I have 2 to the CMC owner for Josh Jacobs. And a second. Yeah, I don't love giving up draft capital in addition. Look, Josh Jacobs is older. Like, he's not old. We were just talking about the ceiling of running backs and the age that you typically want to sell running backs by. Josh Jacobs is at that age ceiling where it's like you shouldn't feel comfortable starting, or you shouldn't feel comfortable trading for Josh Jacobs unless like it's getting a really good deal for it. Because Jacobs at some point, like, he will go down in value. And in my personal dynasty leagues, like, he's already lost value. Now, here's the reality. And this is something that I picked up after the fact that the Packers signed him. The Packers when they signed Josh Jacobs, they gave him, a pretty good contract. And I think it was one of the top 2 contracts in addition to Saquon as far as, like, total value. But if you actually looked at the contract, they gave him less than half of the total value of the contract in guarantees. That is not a good sign. That typically says, like, that basically says, like, we're going to give you 2 years guaranteed on this team, and if we don't really like what we're seeing, we'll cut you after year 2. So Jacobs, to me, is a little bit nervous. Like, if you were talking about Mason for Jacobs straight up, I'd be more on board with it. Or Mason in a 3rd rounder. But Mason in a second is just too much right now. I get it. Mason doesn't have a ton of long-term value, and he's going to the CMC owner. I think for me, I said this to someone earlier in the week. If you have Jordan Mason and you're not the CMC owner, and the CMC owner wants Jordan Mason, you need to hold his feet to the fire. This is the time to do it because they're losing without Jordan Mason. That's the reality. They're getting screwed without Christian McCaffrey, and they know they need him. So I think I take that, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire on this one. What are you going to give me? Because I need better than Josh Jacobs in addition to a 2nd rounder with Jordan Mason. That's my advice to you. Appreciate the super chat. TZ, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat today. Need a flex. Ford, Stevenson, J-Mo, Michael Wilson, or Dobbs. Full PPR. Full PPR. Romeo Dobbs, now that Jordan Love is back, he's definitely in play. Unlike he was with Malik Willis. He's definitely in play. With J-Mo, listen, I get it. Last week was bad for J-Mo. I'm ultimately still okay with playing J-Mo. Now, understand this. If you play Jameson Williams, that is a situation where you have to understand he's boomer bust. Like, last week he looked a lot like his first 2 years where he wasn't as involved. But I do think ultimately, like, he's got plenty of upside, and he had 20 targets through the first 2 games. So he's obviously creating a role for himself in this offense that's more than just a big play threat. So based on that, like, if it's me, I'm playing Jameson Williams this week. The second option, if you're not as comfortable with playing Jameson, I get it. I totally understand why. My second option is probably going to be Jerome Ford because I think that he's got more there than Ramondre does this week. Ramondre is going to struggle this week against 49ers. I'd be shocked if he doesn't. This guy, he's fun with the ball, so it's like maybe he doesn't even get as much volume as he needs to outproduce Jerome Ford. Because let's say this, like if Jerome Ford has 10 carries and Ramondre has 14 carries, I think I prefer Jerome Ford's 10 carries because he's got more quality volume on the team that he's on. It's not that the Browns offense is some great offense. They're better than the Patriots, though. So I think that I'd prefer Ford if you didn't want to go with J-Mo, which I understand if you don't. I'm personally going to go with Jameson Williams, though. Appreciate the super chat today. MNE IV or 4, the 4th, whatever. Appreciate the super chat. Half PPR, need a flex. Akers, Yeshivas, or Ridley? Obviously, Akers, I've gotten several questions on Akers today, and my rationale for Akers is this: if you believe in Akers the player, and if you believe in the situation in Houston, this is the day to try him. It's the day to try him because the matchup's so great against the Jags. James Cook ripped him up. Jerome Ford and Deonta Foreman combined for like 100 yards a couple weeks back. Like, this is the matchup to play Cam Akers in if you have conviction on him. I don't personally have a ton of conviction on Cam Akers myself. So it's hard for me to endorse the move. But if you like him, this is the week to try him because these options right here, I can understand why you do it. Like, if you have conviction, I'm okay with you playing Akers over Ridley. Definitely okay with you playing him over Yeshivas with T. Higgins back. Now, me personally, I'm playing Ridley. I'm playing Ridley because the matchup against the Dolphins is not particularly a scary one. Like, I get it. They have Jalen Ramsey. He's really just a big name at this point. He's been shredded by wide receivers this year. So I'm not that worried about Ridley's matchup versus Jalen Ramsey myself. I get it. Again, if you want to go with Akers, that's totally fine. I get it. I'm personally okay with going with Ridley myself. That's the move that I'm gonna make is going with Calvin Ridley. And again, appreciate the super chat today. Up next we had Joel. Joel, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Start A-Rich, Goff, or Darnold. A-Rich, I cannot endorse playing Anthony Richardson. Cannot endorse him. Richardson is going to struggle big time this week against the Steelers. I think if there's a week that you can confidently sit Anthony Richardson, it's this week. And again, I will say the one thing with Anthony Richardson is when you drafted him, I hope you understood that you needed to be able to weather the storm whenever he had bad games. Because he will. And I think this week it will be another bad one. Now, you've got some other options here. You know, Goff this week, the matchup is not particularly great, and he hasn't been very good in fantasy. So I struggle with him. Darnold, the matchup is really scary, but he has been really good. Hey, just really quick, guys. The way to get your question answered, you're not going to get it answered by spamming it in here. I'll just tell you that. The way to get it answered is by doing a super chat. So if you're at the bottom spamming, it's not really a good look for everybody else. Darnold, just because how good he's been, Darnold has been really consistently good in fantasy. I'll go with Darnold personally. That's my move. I have more faith in Darnold because the offense that he's got behind him is really just the offensive system he's got behind him is really good. And I think that ultimately he's got the most consistency combined with upside this week. Until Goff plays well in fantasy, I can't tell anybody to play him, to be honest with you. Like, I think that Goff is in a situation where he should be really good in fantasy right now. It's just not really there. I think Detroit's kind of struggling to find balance right now in their offense. Like, they just kind of look off when you actually watch the Bears, or when you actually watch the Lions. They just look off a little bit. So I would go with Darnold myself. Appreciate the super chat, though. Robert Guidell, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. PPR pick 2. Brian Thomas Jr., Shaheed, Jennings, Worthy, or Akers. You know, I would probably play Akers in this situation. This is the first time I will actually say, yeah, I'll play Cam Akers. Cam Akers, the thing with him is that, like I've been saying, I don't have a ton of conviction on the player myself. Now, with Jennings, if Jennings was without Debo, I would say I'd play him over Cam Akers. But the thing with Cam Akers is that he's got nothing in his way, right? Like, the matchup is so good and he's got nobody in his way. With Jennings, he's got guys in his way now. So I just kind of see Jennings' role probably going back to what it has been. And that's just not tons of fantasy upside. So I personally would play Akers in this situation. We finally found a situation where I can endorse that. And I probably am going to go with Brian Thomas Jr. The one thing with Brian Thomas is that the offense sucks. And Trevor Lawrence, honestly, he stinks. I mean, he just doesn't look good. The one thing with him is that he's so clearly the best option in Jacksonville at this point. And it's not like he's done fantastic like himself. It's not like he's been fantastic and you can't afford to put him on your bench. Like, he's been okay, right? But the thing with him is that he's really all they've got. That's really all they've got at this point with him. So I just think that really he's got plenty of upside just out of necessity in a full PPR league. So I'm personally going to go with Brian Thomas Jr. myself in a full PPR league along with Cam Akers. Appreciate the super chat, Robert. Nick Sergio, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Start 2, wide receiver 2, and flex. Najee, Etienne, London, and Pickens. Thanks. So let's get your wide receiver 2 sorted out real quick. Drake London's my guy. You know, at the very least, with London, at the very least, you're going to get manufactured touches, and it looks like a lot of red zone opportunities with Drake London. So even though I don't think he has a ton of upside over the middle of the field and like on deep shots, I think London is, just with Cousins, has more upside in fantasy than Pickens does. Pickens is the wide receiver 1, but it doesn't really mean a ton. It's kind of like having the wide receiver 1 in New England. I mean, that's just, let's be honest about that. Pickens is a great player, but it's like having DeMario Douglas in New England. It's just not worth that much, right? So I would personally play London over Pickens as my wide receiver. Najee or Etienne? You know, it's so funny. Like, I can't imagine another time where I would say play Najee over Etienne. I think I'm going to tell you to do it, though. I would do it. I would personally do it. Because the thing with Etienne, man, I've been saying this. Etienne is on a bad team. And my concerns at the beginning of the year were with Tank Bigsby. That he was going to lose volume and it was not going to be good. At this point, I don't really care. I'm not even concerned about that. Tank Bigsby's role has gone down. And he doesn't look like a threat to Etienne. Etienne has done as much as he can do on a bad offense. When you're trailing in that many games, and they will be trailing today against the Texans, when you're trailing that much, you just don't have a ton of upside as a running back. Like, unless you're getting pass catching upside, which he does, but the rushing upside has just really not been there with Etienne this year, any week. So Najee, like, again, very rarely would I tell you to play Najee over Etienne. This is the week I'm doing it personally, though. Because with Najee, it's the perfect storm that he's got going for him this week. Najee Harris, running back 1 by far. Even with Jaylen Warren there, he's been averaging like 20 carries. Now Jaylen Warren's out. So he probably takes over more receptions as well. Cordarrelle Patterson comes in probably a little bit today and takes some touches. But Najee's going to handle 25 opportunities today. I would be shocked if he doesn't. Colts matchup, fantastic. I like their chances of getting down the red zone and getting Najee a goal line carry. I think it's very possible this week. So I think that this is the perfect storm for Najee to actually hit his ceiling today. I would personally be playing Najee over ETN this week. So I'd go Najee, and then I'd go London, the wide receiver. Appreciate the super chat. Twisted Folk, what's going on? You were up next. Full PPR running back. Kamara, but injured, or healthy Braylon Allen. I can't rightfully tell you to sit Kamara. I can't do that. If you've got a gut feeling, I would say fine, but my strong advice is do not sit Alvin Kamara. That dude has been too good. You know, really quick on that, I got a comment yesterday on one of my videos that was like, I appreciate you saying that we could sit Garrett Wilson. And it's like, of course, but I will say this, like, he's not a must sit. And part of the comment was like, you don't always just say play your best players. There are certain guys that I would just not advise benching, ever. I don't care what the matchup looks like. Kamara's kind of one of those guys. He's the running back 2 right now in fantasy, and he's been elite, right? Like, Saquon's up in that category as well. So, we're kind of just at that point with Kamara. Even though he's not fully healthy, I'm just not going to play Braylon Allen over him. A backup running back who, even though he probably still gets, opportunities today, I just don't trust a backup running back over the running back 2 in fantasy football. Deontay but injured, Mooney or Addison. Or drop Addison or Mooney for Jacoby Myers. I personally am not going to drop Addison or Mooney for him because I think both of those guys have longer late season upside. And I think that, again, a good litmus test is always, if you drop this player, do you think people will go after him on the waiver wire? And the best way to test this is to say, if somebody dropped Jordan Addison or Darnell Mooney in your league, would you go after them? If the answer is yes, that player has trade value. So with Jacoby Myers, like, I love it this week. It's great. The way I would say this is, if you need a win this week, then I understand the merit. Like, if you're 0-3 and you need to win this week, I understand dropping Mooney for him. But if you're 2-1 or even 1-2, I think Deontay Johnson's going to be a fine asset. Like, Deontay, I get it, the injury is there. I just want to make sure he's playing really quick before I tell you that he's okay. By all accounts, I saw he was going to be fine. Yeah, he's fine. He's active. So he's going to play. The matchup's great, and I think that ultimately he's probably got just as much upside as Jacoby Myers does. So I would personally stick with Deontay. I get it. I get the question. But I'm personally going to go with Deontay here. I just don't think that it's a wise move to drop Addison or Mooney for a 1 week good play. And it might be more than 1 week, to be clear. Like, Jacoby Myers very well may be the wide receiver 1 in Las Vegas for a couple weeks because Devontae Adams is injured right now. So, we could be in that situation here. Appreciate the super chat, though. Okay, looks like our video is struggling right now. Hopefully the video comes back. Let's see if we can jumpstart it really quick. All right, here we go. Video's good now. Appreciate the super chat. Next up, we had Addictive Flicks. What's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Trade Singletary and Shakir for Reed and Andrews. I think that with Singletary, I think that his upside really is just kind of limited this season. Like, it's going to be very much like what we've seen, right? With Singletary, the matchup was so great for him in week 4 against the Cowboys on Thursday night. And he just didn't do it. Like, he couldn't do it because, number one, he's not that great of a player. Number two, he's not on a great offense. So it's like last year, like, he had people fooled, I think, right? Because he was on a great offense that is, like, for a period of time when he was able to get the start, over Dameon Pierce with the Texans last year, he was able to have good games because the offense put him in great situations because they have a great quarterback. This year, it's not like that. That guy's an average player on a bad offense. So I just don't see a ton of upside. Now, Shakir's the tough guy to give up. But you're getting Jaden Reed, who I believe is a great upside player. With Jordan Love, I continue to say this, that's a player that I want on my team and I want in my starting roster. I want him in my starting lineup. With Shakir, he's like 50-50 right now, whether I'm playing him or not. I've got some leagues where I'm playing Khalil Shakir. I've got some leagues where he's on the bench. So I don't feel as much conviction personally about putting Shakir in my lineup as I do with Jaden Reed. So I'm personally going to take the side of Reed here because I'm okay with taking the shot on Mark Andrews, right? Like, Singletary, if you're set at running back, giving him up is nothing to me. And at tight end, like, you could be getting a late season score. You know, maybe he does come back at some point in the season and have upside. Obviously, it's not great right now, and it hasn't looked great, but I'll take it. I'll take the potential here with Mark Andrews later on. Appreciate the super chat. Zen, what's going on? You're up next. Appreciate the super chat. With everyone looking like they will play, pick 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, and a flex in a half PPR format. Amon-Ra, Olave, DJ Moore. Okay, Deontay, Brian Thomas Jr. Running backs, Gibbs, Moss, Chuba, and Steele. Pick 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, and a flex, half PPR. Amon-Ra is going to go in my lineup without question. And I still prefer Deontay over DJ Moore this week. Yeah, Deontay's matchup is great. I think the chemistry with Andy Dalton somehow is really there. I think he looked great with Andy Dalton. So I would personally go with Deontay and Amon-Ra in my lineup at the wide receiver position. Running backs, definitely Gibbs. And probably go with Moss over Chuba because I think the game script's going to favor him. And then really it comes down to Chuba, Olave, and DJ Moore. It's tough. Half PPR. Olave, I really just don't love in a half PPR format right now. Like, he just doesn't have a ton of scoring upside. He never has. And with DJ is kind of in a similar boat as Olave. And I think at this point I prefer DJ over Olave, but do I prefer him over Chuba? With Chuba, the matchup is so good for him to have upside. But the problem is if they lose this game pretty early on, he's going to not be able to run the ball as much. So if they get out to an early deficit, it's going to be a problem for Chuba. But ultimately, he's going to have pass catching upside as well. I'm probably personally going to play Chuba over him. My wide receivers are Amon-Ra and Deontay. My running backs are Gibbs and Moss. I'm personally going to play Chuba as my flex. I get it. If you've got conviction on somebody else, that's totally fine. I understand not wanting to play Chuba. The offense is scary in Carolina. I'm going to play Chuba, though. That's my move, personally. That's my gut is telling me that. Appreciate the super chat. Efren Gramajo, what's going on? Ayuk, London, or Odunze, full PPR. If Keenan Allen was not playing for the Bears, Rome Odunze would probably be the pick here. Maybe or maybe not, depending how I felt about London at the particular day. But I do think that without with Keenan Allen, it's tough for me to endorse Rome Odunze at a rate I probably would have endorsed him at if it was just him. So he scares me, obviously. And I think that I think London is probably the best play this week, given the matchups. The matchup is so tough for him. But again, like the one good thing that I take away from Drake London right now is that he's getting so many schemed targets his way, manufactured for a wide receiver one in the offense. Like he's getting those touches manufactured for him. Ayuk looks bad, first of all, and Odunze is probably not going to be. He's going to be limited. His impacts will be limited with Keenan Allen there. So in a full PPR format, I'm going to go with Drake London. I just think that if anything you count on for a big play from Ayuk and Odunze at this point, I'd go with London myself. Appreciate the super chat. King Autumn, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Allen Lazard, Quentin Johnson, Rachaad White, or Bucky Irving at flex this week. I have Christian Kirk too, but he hasn't been great. Yeah, I'm not playing Christian Kirk over any of those guys. I would honestly play every last one of those guys over Christian Kirk. I think he's cooked. I think he's totally cooked. Bad guy. Not bad guy. Bad player. Bad player right now in fantasy. Rachaad White. It's so gross, man. That matchup is so gross. Bucky Irving, if Bucky Irving wasn't freaking injured, he'd be the answer for me. But he's injured. And I don't know, I don't realistically see them giving him more opportunities this week than they would give to Rachaad. It sucks, man. I really want to tell you to play Bucky. I just can't get there. Bucky is injured. Why'd you have to do it this week, Bucky? Ugh. I can't play Quentin in most situations because QJ is flexible these days, but Herbert's a statue, and he's very, very this close to getting re-injured and missing the game. I mean, I'm sure he's going to play this game, but he could very easily not finish the game. Their tackles are gone. Both starting tackles are gone in Los Angeles. And Chris Jones is going to terrorize him all day today. So Lazard this week, Lazard with Rodgers. And I said this earlier in the week. I said this yesterday on the Start and Sit video. The one thing that I like about Lazard this week is that Garrett Wilson's going to be matched up. He's going to be blanketed all day by Pat Surtain. Pat Surtain will follow Garrett Wilson all day. So that's going to open up opportunities, I think, for Allen Lazard. So when I break it down, this one's got to be broken down pretty low level. I would take Lazard over QJ, and White and Bucky may very well split because they're both not 100%. The matchup against the Eagles is not particularly ideal. I'm going to go ahead and play Lazard. Yeah, I'm going to play Lazard this week. That's a tough one, though. I had to break that one down, pretty low level to basics. And if you have another conviction or feeling, then take it. But my gut's telling me Allen Lazard on this one. Appreciate the super chat. Up next, we had Vic TX361. What's going on? Appreciate the super chat today. PPR, Dobbs or Brian Thomas, or pick up Michael Wilson or Tucker. No, I'm good with playing Brian Thomas. Yeah, I think Brian Thomas is a great play. Again, we were just talking about Christian Kirk. The thing with Brian Thomas is that not only is he the best option at this point for Jacksonville, they're going to be in so many negative game scripts. And today's going to be an example where they had to throw the ball. And the only guy that I think is legitimately worth playing in that Jacksonville wide receiver room is Brian Thomas. He's the best of the bunch. Gabe Davis is not only, he's injured, and he hasn't done much. Christian Kirk, honestly, he looks cooked, like I said earlier. I just think that there's just really not much there with anybody else. other than Brian Thomas there. So, like, out of necessity, they just have to throw the ball to Brian Thomas. Last week, they threw to him, I think, 9 times. I think he had 9 targets, which is the most he's had on the season. I think this game could go very similarly to where they get crushed again. And Brian Thomas, either way, is the wide receiver 1 at this point. Dobbs, the only problem with him is that he's just inconsistent with Jordan Love. He's a best ball play for me personally, or I'd have to go even deeper. I would personally play Brian Thomas Jr. But I will say, like, Michael Wilson, I said it earlier in the week when I was going through the waivers. Michael Wilson is definitely a player that you want to keep your eye on this week. If he has another good week, you need to claim him off the waiver wire. Right now, I would just say keep an eye on him this week, but I do think that with Trey McBride about to be injured, like he's about to miss this game, Michael Wilson might have a good one. So I would say play Brian Thomas Jr. though. Appreciate the super chat. Kevin, the credit guy, what's going on today? Start 2 full PPR. Gabe Davis, Jahan Dotson, Braylon Allen, or Dameon Pierce. Or I'm sorry, Alec Pierce. I was going to say Alec Pierce. Dameon Pierce is not playing. So you can't do that. I'm sure you're talking about Alec Pierce. Braylon's going to be one of them because his workload is better. Gabe Davis, I guess he's playing. I guess that's the reason you're asking me this question. Gabe Davis is going to play. Let me just check on it really quick, though. Gabe Davis, what is your story today? Gabe Davis is going to play. Don't really care. To be honest with you, I really don't. I really do not care whether Gabe plays or not. Jahan Dotson, I've got no interest in. I'd play Gabe before I played Jahan Dotson. At the very least, what we've seen from Gabe is he's involved. I mean, Dotson has done, he's been a nothing burger, and he had opportunities last week. But to tell you the truth, I'd probably play Alec Pierce over both those guys because at least with Alec Pierce, he's been effective. And Gabe Davis, it's not that he's seeing like a ton more targets than Pierce is seeing, and he's not been as effective. So I would personally play Alec Pierce. That's like one of the only ways that Indy's going to be able to move the ball today against the Steelers is if they hit a big chunk play like that. So they're going to try it at the very least, and I think they can hit on one. The one thing that teams have been able to do against the Steelers this year is hit on big plays. Steelers are definitely have busted in coverage a couple times. So I would go with Braylon Allen and Alec Pierce. Appreciate the super chat, Kevin, the credit guy. Tyler Sperry, good to see you in here today. MYERS. I'm so bad with the slang, guys. You guys, just a note in the future, please spell things out. I'm young at age, but I'm definitely older in my heart. So I don't know a ton of slang, I'll be honest. My rest of season is what I'm getting at. Yoshi, Atwell, Michael Wilson, or Irving. Yeah, like I said, the way I'm going to interpret what you meant here is by saying, like, who I prefer rest of season. If somebody knows what this means, please put it in the chat. Because MYERS, I have no idea what that means. Yeah, I mean, if we're talking rest of season, I think that Bucky's the guy I prefer. Because I think I've been saying it, and I still stick by this. I think that it's very likely at some point Bucky is going to take over this backfield. I think it could have been this week if he wasn't injured. Genuinely. I think he could have done it this week if he wasn't injured. But since he is injured, it screws it up. It screws it up. So, rest of season, I would take Bucky because Yoshivas is he's fine. I think he'll have a role all season, but I think Bucky has more upside long season. Tutu has a lifespan, and Michael Wilson, I need to see it first. So I would go with Bucky Irving. I hope I answered your question right. Yeah, please for the future, spell things out, guys. I'm really bad with the lingo. Appreciate the super chat. Next up, we had JV. What is going on today? Good to see it in here. Two flex. Reed, Walker, Harris, Shaheed, Yeshivas, or Mark Andrews. Two flex. Jaden Reed's got to be in there for me. And it's close. I'll be honest. It's closer than it should be between Kenneth Walker and Najee. The one thing I worry about with Kenneth Walker this week is, actually there's two things. The Lions matchup is not good. And the potential that, there definitely is potential that he does not see 100% of the snaps. I'd actually be shocked if we saw him get 100% of the snaps tomorrow for the running backs. Week one, I don't think we're going to see that from Kenneth Walker. Not only is he probably still not 100%, I think the practice participation this week would indicate he's not 100%, but also Sharp has played really well. So it's kind of hard to be it's kind of hard to be put him back on the bench just because Kenneth Walker's back. You see what he did in 2 weeks, it's tough. I still think he probably has more ups. I don't know, man. That's tough. Jaden's definitely one of them, but I'll tell you this. My gut says to play Kenneth Walker, but logically Harris makes more sense. Najee makes more sense this week. If you want to go with that, I have no issue doing it. But I would definitely play both Kenneth and Najee over Shaheed, Yeshivas, and Andrews. It's between Walker and Harris. Reed is definitely one of them, and Walker and Harris, it's really between them. It makes logical sense to play Najee in this matchup, but I've seen Najee. He's not a high upside player. Everything has to hit this week that I think can hit for him to get 20 points. And I think that's in the upside cards. With Kenneth, he's just a more explosive player. Matchup's worse, though. So my gut tells me Kenneth, but it probably makes more sense logically to go with Najee. So I would probably play Kenneth myself, but again, I'll leave that one to you. Between those two guys, who do you feel the most conviction on? I probably would say Walker is my pick. Appreciate the super chat. Christian Rodriguez, what's going on today? Steele or Judy? Maybe Pop Douglas. Demario Douglas he's fine. Especially in your situation where you've kind of got some deeper options here. It's not a bad move, necessarily. I'm not going to make that move over Carson Steele. I would personally play Pop Douglas over Judy because I'm just not a big Judy guy as is, and I'm not into Cleveland receiver options outside of Amari Cooper. Deshaun Watson sucks, man. He sucks. So there's just not enough upside there for anybody. It's going to be one or the other. And the thing with Judy is he's not hitting on Amari Cooper level upside, right? He's their wide receiver too. And a wide receiver 2 on Cleveland is just not worth that much with Deshaun Watson. I'm personally going to play Carson Steele over Pop. Because at least with Steele, the offense is so great. He's playing for the best offense in football, right? So that's one. Number two is that, I understand people's concern with Carson Steele now that Kareem Hunt is back in action. But for me personally, when I look at this and I say, okay, well, Kareem Hunt is like technically listed as third on the depth chart, and he's just coming up from the practice squad. Like, maybe he doesn't even get a helmet. He probably gets a helmet today. Carson Steele, though, the matchup against the Chargers is going to be a pretty good one. Chargers do have a good defense. They're banged up, though. And I think that the Chargers are going to get crushed today, so they probably end up in a pretty positive game script for most of that game. I'm playing Carson Steele myself. I understand wanting to go with, Pop Douglas is fine, but I ultimately just like a receiver in New England doesn't have much upside. It's kind of like, I was saying with the wide receiver 2 in Cleveland. Just not much upside for Judy. I would go with Carson Steele. Appreciate the super chat, though. Rob T, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat today. Half PPR, need 2. Moss, Zachan. I kind of like that name better than Achan. I think we need to add a Z to Devon Achan's last name. Make him Devon Zachan. Pollard Kyron. I'd go with Achan for sure because Achan is definitely the highest upside guy. It was making me laugh because like during the running back rankings video, obviously I accidentally edited out Devon Achan being in the top 6, and people were like, "Where is Achan? You're an idiot!" And it's like, hold on, guys. It was an accident. I understand it, but it was an accident. He was supposed to be there at number 6 over Kyron. So I would personally go with Achan. And I think, honestly, man, like I think Pollard's got a great matchup in this game as well. I think Pollard's a better player than Moss. And Moss, honestly, has a good upside matchup as well. Like, the upside is definitely there for Moss's matchup. With Pollard, though, like, Pollard's got the matchup and he's got I think he's a better player. So I'm gonna ultimately go with the guy who's got the better matchup and that I'm more confident in as a player. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot Kyron was there. Oh, yeah. No way you're leaving Kyron on the bench. No, it's going to be Achan and Kyron. Yeah, no question about it. Yeah, those two guys are just in a different tier than Pollard or Zach Moss are. Yeah, it's not even a question. I'm definitely going with Achan and Kyron here, without question. Yeah, no question. Appreciate the super chat, though. Medina 2197, what's going on? Full PPR, pick 1 flex. Jennings, Jacobs, Shaheed, or Waddle. Pick 1. Quarterback is Jalen Hurts or Kyler Murray. So I'll answer the quarterback one because I actually think it's a relatively easy one. I'd go with Kyler this week. If Jalen Hurts wasn't dealing with 2 starting, not just starting, star wide receivers being out, I would say you could play him. And you can play Jalen Hurts, right? Like, I'm totally okay with you playing Jalen Hurts over, an Anthony Richardson or over a Baker Mayfield. But with Kyler Murray, like, Kyler's been great in fantasy. He's got the rushing upside, and he's got the better matchup against the Commanders. So, yeah, that's an easy one for me personally. I'd go Kyler over Jalen Hurts. And pick 1 flex, Jennings, Jacobs, Shaheed, Waddle. Yeah, I tell you, if Jennings was still on his own, and it was just him and Ayuk, I would say play Jennings. But Debo's back, and Kittle's back. Realistically, I just see more upside with Debo and Kittle than I do with Jennings. Jennings is, like, honestly back in, like, wide receiver 3 territory. It's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. Honestly, like, the matchup with Jacobs is not great, right? Like, the matchup with Jacobs is not very good. Ultimately, I think he's there. I just have a feeling, man. I do have a feeling with him. I've got a feeling with him the same way I've got a feeling that Mike Evans is going to be he's going to have a really good game today for the Bucs. I'm personally going with my guts telling me Jacobs. The matchup is not great, and the obviously, like, the big issue for people last week was that he was in a timeshare. I get it. I get all that. But ultimately for me, like, I just think that Jacobs is the better. I think he's just the better play than all of them most of the time. And so I'm going to go with Jacobs because I think he's the better play ultimately in most situations than Jennings Shaheed and Waddle. And I just kind of, I don't know how I have a feeling this week. I don't know why. I have a feeling Josh Jacobs is going to have a good game. I really do. I have a feeling he gets in the end zone and gets a good fantasy performance. So I'm going with the gut. And I would say Jacobs, and I would play definitely Kyler Murray at quarterback. Appreciate the super chat. CDV, what's going on? Who to start as flex in full PPR? Dotson, Worthy, Yeshivas, or Watson? Full PPR league. Guys, I get it. Like, some people may feel better about this one than me. I can't rightfully tell anybody to play Dotson most of the time. Dotson's done nothing for the Eagles. Like, he had opportunities last week, and he didn't do anything. Really, the big headline for me is Dallas Goedert could very well be the tight end one again this week. Like, he's going to have so many opportunities in this offense because I genuinely just don't think that the receiving options outside of Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown in Philadelphia are very good. Like, I get it. I understand the situation's there for him to do well. I just don't really believe in him as a player that much these days. Worthy, I love having Worthy on my team. I just want to see it more first, especially in a full PPR format. Yeshivas is probably my answer here. That's the move I would make because Yeshivas, again, the good thing about Yeshivas is he's carving out a role in this offense, right? Like, it's not that he's not getting a ton of, like, downfield targets, right? He's not, like, a super high upside downfield threat, especially with T. Higgins back. The one thing that's good with Yeshivas, though, the matchup's good. That's good. But the good thing with Yeshivas is that the role he's carving out for himself is at the goal line. It's in the red zone. And it's also, like, along the sidelines in, like, third down situations. So Yeshivas is definitely carving out a role for himself, whereas Watson, like, unless you hit a big play, it's just not there with him. And Dotson, again, I get the merit, guys, but I just need to see it first. I would go with Yeshivas personally. Appreciate the super chat, CDV. Ryan Frakowski, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Jacoby or London full PPR? I love Myers here. Yeah, honestly, like, I'm with you. I'm playing Jacoby Myers over Drake London myself. Listen, the thing with Jacoby Myers, in a full PPR format, this guy's going to get peppered with targets today. I would be shocked if he didn't come out of this game with at least 10 targets. I'd be shocked if he didn't. London is lucky to get like 7 or 8 targets. I think London's probably the better player, but Jacoby Myers is this is not a scrub. Jacoby Myers is a legit player, and he always outperforms expectations, right? So Jacoby Myers against the Browns today, like, he's going to get peppered with targets because they won't be able to run the freaking ball. They can't run the ball against anybody anyways. So definitely this week against the Browns, they're going to have to throw to Jacoby Myers. So I'd just be shocked if he doesn't outperform Drake London in a full PPR format. If we're talking standard or half PPR, probably lean more towards London. Half PPR still might take Jacoby, though. But definitely in a full PPR, I'm playing Jacoby Myers this week. Appreciate the super chat. Papa Trisker, you're up next. What's going on? Start one. Addison, Akers, or Brian Thomas Jr. I would go with Brian Thomas. Yeah. Well, Addison, I'm not playing him. I need to see it first. Akers or Brian Thomas Jr. it's a toss-up. They're relatively close. I'm going to play Brian Thomas Jr. still, yeah. I just have seen more from Brian Thomas, the player. The involvement is obviously growing. It's not just there, it's growing for Brian Thomas. And Akers just, like, I just don't have a ton of conviction on Akers. Like, if we're talking, like, Akers versus Jahan Dotson, I'd take Akers. Because he's got the matchup and he's got the situation. Like, I get it. The matchup and the situation are there for him without question. But I just can't get by the player I just don't think he is. I just don't think he's a very good player. So I'm going to go with Brian Thomas Jr. over Akers. But I will say, like, if you've got conviction on Cam Akers, this goes to anybody out there. if you're deciding between Cam Akers and like Brian Thomas Jr., or Cam Akers and Khalil Shakir, or Cam Akers and like somebody like a Chuba, like I'm probably going to take Chuba over Cam Akers, but go with your gut because the matchup, the logical perspective is like Cam Akers should have a really good week. I just can't get behind it. I just don't think he's that great of a player. So I'm personally just going to avoid him in most situations here, but I understand why people want to play him. So I would go with Brian Thomas myself. Appreciate the super chat. Cletus, what's going on today? Should I start Marvin Harrison Jr. or Rice? Appreciate the content. Well, you've got good problems here, so you don't need to worry about it. I just think that when you're talking about this high of upside players, you have to split hairs, right? With Rashee Rice, there's simply no question that he's the wide receiver one in Kansas City. There's just simply not a question. There's also not a question that the moment Pacheco goes down, Rashee Rice becomes even more valuable because they can't run the ball as effectively. So that's why last week you saw him get like 14 or 16 targets. I don't remember what the number was. It was around that. That's why, like, you can't. It's so hard to put Rice on the bench. I don't know how you're in this position. I really don't. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Marvin, the matchup's the best. Like, he may very well be the wide receiver one this week. He very might well be. It's hard. You got great talk. You've got great problems, though. Like, that's the reality, is that your problems are not. They're not just minuscule problems. I'd probably go with Marvin Harrison Jr. this week, but I get the reason that you wouldn't. I get the reason that you wouldn't. I'd go Marvin, though, because I think he's got the most upside. Appreciate the super chat. Pumpkin VJC, what's going on today? Pick 3, Metcalf, Evans, Tyreek, Reed, and Jennings. We're definitely playing Evans and Metcalf because the matchup for Mike is good. I think it's a Mike Evans week. The matchup for Metcalf is good as well. Detroit Lions have given up a lot through the air. This is where we're starting to find out where my Tyreek Hill line is right now. If we did not have Jordan Love this week, and if we had Malik Willis for Jaden Reed, it would make it a lot easier for me to say Tyreek Hill. But since Jordan Love is back in action, since we have more stability at the quarterback, and not only just stability, we have more upside because Jordan Love and him have great chemistry. It's a lot harder to sit Jaden this week. Jennings is not it for me anymore. Jennings, the beginning of the week looked so bright for him, and it's just not there. It's not there. Debo and Kittle are back in the lineup today. So, it's tough. I would personally go with Jaden over Tyreek. That's where my line is at right now. I would go with Jaden over Tyreek. So I'd go Metcalf, Evans, and Jaden Reed. Appreciate the super chat. Tyler Sperry, Jacoby Myers, start 1. Okay, let's go back up to what you were saying earlier. Make sure I have this question right. It's going to take me a minute to find that chat. Okay. Myers. Gotcha. Myers, Yoshi, Atwell, Mike Wilson, Irving. Yeah, I'd play Jacoby Myers. Yeah, Jacoby Myers is the best guy. Jacoby Myers, honestly, guys, like, I do not see a world where he does not get 10 targets today. I would be utterly shocked if Jacoby Myers doesn't see 10 targets today. They can't run the ball, and the matchup is great against the Bengals to throw the ball. So, yeah, I've got to go with Jacoby Myers today. The closest guy in second is probably Tutu Atwell, but Tutu Atwell at least has, like, he's got more target competition than Michael Wilson, or I'm sorry, than Tutu Atwell does. So I would go with Jacoby Myers. Appreciate the super chat. Nicholas Bond, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Half PPR. Flex Olave or Ayuk and need one tight end out of Ertz, Higgins, Strange, Hunter Henry, or Conklin. Olave or Ayuk? I'd probably stick with Olave because at least they really don't have like other great receiving options outside of him. It's either Olave or it's you got to hit a big play with Rashid Shaheed. That's really what they're looking at in New Orleans. So just out of necessity, Olave I think is going to see more work this week. Ayuk looks bad right now, and they have more options this week than they do with Olave. So Ayuk, I would personally play Chris Olave over Brandon Ayuk this week. And you need a tight end out of Ertz, Elijah Higgins, Strange, Hunter Henry, or Conklin. I'd personally play Strange because, listen, the one good thing that Trevor Lawrence is doing right now is providing tight end upside. That's the one thing that he's doing, and Brian Thomas Jr. to a certain extent. But Cole Strange, or not Cole Strange, what's his name? Brenton Strange. He did well last week. He got in the end zone. He was really the only thing that was giving you legitimate fantasy upside over in Jacksonville. And I think that's the best we can hope for in Jacksonville is that they give Brenton Strange another like 6 or 7 targets. Because that's the one thing that Trevor Lawrence is doing right now. He is playing good with the tight end position. Obviously, no Ingram makes Brenton Strange a legitimate play. So I would go with Brenton Strange at the tight end position, along with Chris Olave. Appreciate the super chat, Nicholas Bond. Next up, we had Miggy909. What's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Should I start Olave or Shakir? Marvin Harrison over Rice? Yeah, another MHJ or Rice question. Man, that's brutal. I mean, not brutal. You've got great problems. Just like, how are you debating this? Like, that's an insane debate to have. Like, should I play Marvin or Rice? Like, that's crazy. Like, you'd be playing both of them in most leagues, but obviously you've got great options. Honestly, though, like, I really don't see much. Like, I do not see how both of them don't go in your lineup. I'll be honest with you. Like, even if you've got, like, Chris Godwin or like, Tyreek Hill or Deontay Johnson or Mike Evans, it's like, I can't understand how you would play only one of the two. Honestly, like, most situations, they're both going in my lineup. I can't stomach sitting one of them. If I had to, I would sit Rice for Marvin, but it's still tough. It's still tough. So I would just say Marvin is in the greater matchup, and he very well could be the wide receiver one. But I don't want to sit Rice. I don't want to sit Rashee Rice. But if you had to, between these two options, I get it. And then Olave or Shakir. Well, I'll tell you this. Olave before the week was definitely a guy that I wanted to play. But with the injury, he has definitely moved down in my rankings. Hey, really quick, guys, if you're spamming the chat, not only is it not going to get your question answered, but you're also not looking good in the eyes of everybody else in here. Everybody's trying to get a question answered. The way to get your question answered and jump the line is to do a super chat. If you're spamming the chat, it's just not a good look. Khalil Shakir at this point, I think I probably would play Shakir over Olave because Shakir at least has the matchup is really good. With Baltimore, like, they're going to have to throw against Baltimore because their run defense is really bad. Or, I mean, I'm sorry, the run defense is really good. And Shakir has been legitimately the wide receiver one. Oh, yeah, it's because you started Neighbors and have Nico. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't blame you then. Then I don't blame you. I would play Marvin over Rice, and I would probably play Khalil Shakir. But you've got great problems, so take solace in knowing that, at the very least. Appreciate the super chat. The next up, we had John Hernandez Gleaton. What's going on today? Good to see you. Appreciate the super chat. Do I give Andrews one more week? Komet starting right now. Yeah, if you have Komet, I'd rather just play him. Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to. There's really not a reason to play Andrews right now if you've got a decent option. I just think that, like, with Andrews, like, you can hold on to him. Like, I would say, like, don't drop him because, again, litmus test yourself. If someone in your league had Andrews and they dropped him, would you pick him up? If the answer is yes, he's got trade value. But the problem is he doesn't have much trade value. So I would just kind of hold him, as painful as it is, and play Komet this week. I will tell you this, though. Komet is definitely in a worse position today than he was a couple days ago, now that we know Keenan Allen's playing. But I probably would go with Komet this week. Appreciate the super chat. Robert Simmons, you were up next. Is Cam Akers a must start this week? By no means at all. No. By no means is he a must start. He's a startable asset. He's not a must start for me. Like I said earlier, Cam Akers is a debate for me in a lot of situations. Like, I am very uncomfortable starting Cam Akers. The way I'm playing Cam Akers is if it's like Jahan Dotson or maybe Rashid Shaheed or Alec Pierce or Zamir White, Alexander Madison. You know, like situations like that where it's like a clear answer. But if I'm talking like Cam Akers versus Tony Pollard, I'm playing Pollard. I'm playing Zach Moss over Cam Akers. It's just a gut level thing for me. I don't trust Cam Akers as a player. I don't think he's that great of a player. I think that he's over the hill and the matchup is great, so logically he should do well, but by no means in my eyes is he a must start. Appreciate the super chat. Andrews or take a chance with Elliott from Arizona. That's tough, man. I get it. Like, theoretically, Kyler's going to throw the ball more to the tight end position. I'd probably play Andrews. I probably would. I just don't know, like, I'll be honest with you, I don't know much about their backup tight end, Elliott. And the problem, if I don't know a tight end, there's a lot of backup tight ends that are blocking tight ends, and they don't have much receiving value. That's Colby Parkinson's problem, by the way, right now in Los Angeles. He's primarily been a blocking tight end, so now being put in this tight end one role, he's just not that. There's not much receiving upside. So I personally would go ahead and play Andrews myself. Appreciate the super chat. Josh Jacobs or Ramondre Stevenson this week? I'm going Jacobs. Like I said, there's two parts to this. Number one is that I actually think Josh Jacobs is in line for a good week. I don't know why. The matchup sucks, and he hasn't done particularly well in fantasy. And on top of that, you know, he's in a situation where he's yielding targets and yielding opportunities to Emmanuel Wilson, right? So I get, like, why people don't want to play Jacobs this week. My gut's telling me it's a good Jacobs week. Because if you look back to, like, all the years with Aaron Jones and with Matt LaFleur as the head coach in Green Bay, that running back one's going to have a good week. And not every week will a running back two be involved. So it was great to see Emmanuel Wilson last week. I think if there's a running back that has success in this offense, it's Jacobs. Now, the other part of this is it comes down to the guy I want more on a way better offense, which is Josh Jacobs. Ramondre is starting to look like the player I thought he would, which is, like, Ramondre himself is a good player. The team sucks. The offense sucks. They're playing the 49ers this week, and he's been fumbling. So if he even loses 4 or 5 opportunities this week, there's just not much upside. There's just not much. So I'd personally go with Jacobs over Ramondre this week. Appreciate the super chat. Godly, what's going on? You're up next. Appreciate the super chat. Start 3. Dotson, Chandler, Hopkins, D. Robinson, Hunter Henry, Otten, Rashad, or Downs. Full PPR. This is a legit one. I'd go with Hunter Henry over K. Dotton out of necessity in the Patriots offense. I'd still go with Rachaad White. Honestly. I'd still go with Rachaad White. And then my third is going to be... D-Hop. I'll take the chance on D-Hop. Full PPR, if he gets 7 targets and catches 6 of them for 50 yards, it's a good option right there. I just can't realistically say... I haven't reached the point where I'd say start Jahan Dotson. I just haven't reached that part. Appreciate the super chat. We're trying to speed race because we've got a couple minutes. Julian Sanchez, what's going on? Shakir or Garrett Wilson? I'd still play Garrett Wilson. I get it. I've been lower on Garrett Wilson this week than a lot of other creators. Matchup's brutal. Ultimately, like with Shakir, the problem with him is that if you take out the touchdown last week, he doesn't see a ton of high upside targets. Like, in a full PPR, I can understand it. If it's half PPR, I'd probably still play Garrett Wilson. I personally am not going to play Shakir over Garrett Wilson. I play Garrett. Appreciate the super chat. Next up, we had Miggy 909. It's because I started Neighbors and also have Nico. Yep, that's right. Jeremy Cody. Jaden Reed versus DJ Moore. I'd go Jaden Reed. I just think the upside's better with him. Next up was Nicodemus. Appreciate the super chat. Bench 1 RB. Taylor, Mason, or Connor. I would go ahead and bench. Honestly, I'd bench Jonathan Taylor, yeah. I think the matchup stinks this week. I'd bench Jonathan Taylor for Mason and Connor. Appreciate the super chat. Connor Calderwood. Pick 2, Waddle, Odunze, Irving, and Olave. I would go Olave, and I would go with... I'd probably still go with Waddle, yeah. Uncomfortably so. I'd go with Olave. I'd go with Olave and then Waddle. Melissa, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Garrett Wilson, Achane, Brian Robinson, Charbonnet, DJ Moore, Shakir. Start 2 wide receivers, 1 flex, full PPR. Thanks in advance. Appreciate you. Achane for sure, and Brian Robinson's going in my lineup. But you can only play 1 flex. I'd go with Achane as the flex, and then the wide receivers I would go ahead and play. I'd play, since you've got 2 issues, like, this is where I say I will play Shakir over Garrett Wilson. I know I just said it a minute ago I wouldn't, but you've got DJ Moore, who is already a lower upside guy, but with targets. I'd go with DJ Moore over Garrett Wilson this week, and I'd go with Shakir. So I'd go with DJ Moore and Khalil Shakir at wide receiver here, because we'll get potential upside with Shakir that we won't with Wilson and Moore. And then I'd go with Achane at the flex. And then last one of the day, Emily Paulson, appreciate the super chat. Amari Cooper or Jacoby Myers, Hill or Montgomery. Definitely going to go with Monty. I'm good with going Monty at this point. I actually pulled Tyreek out of my lineup, and so I could flex Dave Montgomery, so I can endorse that move. I'd go with Montgomery, and I would go with Jacoby Myers over Amari Cooper this week. The targets are going to be there. Amari may hit on a big week, but I'm going with the targets that I could get from Jacoby Myers. All right, guys, that is wrapped up today. I appreciate the super chats, guys. I appreciate y'all being in here. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel on your way out. Let's enjoy some fantasy football action today. Everyone have a good rest of your Sunday.